Imagine a hero's welcome home, followed by the cold steel of a cage, a medal pinned for bravery, followed by a death sentence signed on a forgotten piece of paper. This isn't a work of fiction. This is the hidden, heartbreaking reality for some of the most loyal soldiers who have ever served. They are the K-9 veterans who fight our wars in silence, only to be abandoned in silence when their duty is done. Their stories are rarely told. Their sacrifice is often erased. But this story is different, and you need to stay with me until the very end, because I will show you how we can finally write the ending these forgotten heroes have always deserved. What do you do when the world you fought to protect no longer seems to have a place for you? When the silence of home is louder than the chaos of battle? For three good men, three soldiers, the answers seemed to arrive like a miracle. But they would soon learn that in a world of shadows and scars, miracles are often just traps in disguise. Our story begins in the quiet desperation of civilian life. Meet David, a former Army commando, a man who could navigate the treacherous sands of the Sahel by starlight, but now felt lost in his own home. He'd watch his 8-year-old son, Noah, playing in the yard, and feel a chasm of silence between them, a canyon carved by nightmares he could never share. The therapy sessions that were supposed to help were a financial black hole, and his pride, a soldier's pride, wouldn't let him admit he was drowning. Hundreds of miles away, his former squad mate, Leo, answered the phone. It was his mother. He could hear the tremor in her voice before she even said the words. His father's sudden illness had left them with a mountain of medical debt. The small house they had saved for their entire lives, their piece of the American dream, was on the verge of foreclosure. Leo, a man who had carried wounded comrades through gunfire, now stood in his kitchen, utterly powerless to lift the weight crushing his own parents. And then there was Marcus. In a dusty, rented garage, he was trying to bring a ghost back to life. He was building a custom furniture workshop, a tribute to his best friend, who had died by his side on their last tour. It was more than a business, it was a promise. But the final notices from the bank were piling up. The dream, his sacred promise, was being suffocated by red ink. Three honorable men, backed into three separate corners, were united by one common enemy: desperation. And that's when the phone call came. The voice on the other end was smooth, powerful, and professional. It belonged to Julian Croft, a shipping magnate of immense wealth, a man whose world was built on precision and control. He explained that he needed a small, discreet team for a one-day security detail. High-value assets being moved through a remote part of the Florida Everglades. The pay was $75,000, each, cash. It was a lifeline. A prayer answered. It was too good to be true, and deep down, they knew it. But they couldn't afford to question it. Hope for men who have none is a powerful currency. They all said yes. The drive into the humid heart of Florida felt strangely quiet. The deeper they went, the narrower the road became, until it was just a dirt track swallowed by mangrove trees and the oppressive hum of the swamp. Finally, the luxury SUV leading them pulled to a stop in a small, muddy clearing. And there was nothing. No trucks, no assets, no facility. Just the suffocating heat, the drone of insects, and three iron posts driven deep into the dark earth. That was the first moment of cold dread. The air, thick with moisture, suddenly felt thin in their lungs. Then Julian Croft stepped out of his vehicle. In person, his calm demeanor was terrifying. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, held no warmth, no life. They only held a grief that had festered into something cold and hard as steel. He wasn't there to hire them. He was there to pass judgment. His son Daniel had died on a mission in the Sahel, a mission where David, Leo, and Marcus had also served. A tragic equipment malfunction. But in Croft's twisted world of pain, it wasn't an accident. It was negligence. And the price for that negligence was to be paid here, in this God-forsaken swamp. The zip ties came out, industrial strength, unbreakable. As Croft's men secured them to the posts, their worlds shrank to the bite of plastic on their wrists and the cold finality in the billionaire's voice. For David, the last thing he saw in his mind was his son's face, waiting by the window for a father who would never come home. For Leo, the last thing he heard was the echo of his mother's trembling voice, a sound he could no longer comfort. And for Marcus, the dream of his workshop, the promise to his fallen friend, dissolved into the humid, unforgiving air. They were left to the sun, the insects, and the slow, agonizing crawl of time. It was a collision of two worlds, one of men desperate to save their future, and one of a man chained to the grief of his past. Their honor wasn't for sale, but their hope had just been bought and paid for with a devastating lie. But in his carefully crafted hell, in his perfect plan for retribution, Julian Croft had forgotten one crucial detail. He had forgotten about another soldier who had been abandoned in the wild, a soldier who never ever forgets a promise. In the humid maze of the Florida Everglades, a ghost had been living for 2 years, a shadow with a coat of rich chocolate, eyes the color of amber, and scars that told stories of a war fought on a different continent. His name was Kaiser, a Belgian Malinois, a former K-9 soldier. He survived on instinct, on the hunt, on a profound distrust of the human world that had betrayed him. His days were a rhythm of survival, his memory a locked room he never visited. Until today, a scent drifted on the humid air, cutting through the familiar smells of mud and decay. It was a scent that didn't belong here. It was sweat and fear, yes. But underneath it all, there was something else, something ancient and immediate, a scent that blasted open the locked door in his mind. Suddenly he wasn't in Florida. He was back in the Sahel, the air thick with the taste of dust and cordite. He felt the phantom weight of his tactical harness, heard the phantom scream of incoming fire. He remembered the crushing weight of twisted metal after his Humvee hit a mine. And then he remembered the hands, firm but gentle hands digging him out, a voice whispering in his ear, promising he wouldn't be left behind. The scent belonged to those hands. He moved through the swamp, not like a stray dog, but like the phantom he was. His paws barely made a sound on the damp earth. Caution was his nature, but a debt, a life debt, was his law. And then he saw them. 3 men bound and helpless, and one of them, the one whose scent had called to him across time and distance, was his soldier, David. In a haze of heat and dehydration, David's eyes fluttered open and focused on the shape in front of him. For a moment he thought it was a hallucination, a final trick of a dying mind. But then he whispered the name, a prayer more than a word. Kaiser! The dog's ears twitched. A soft, low whimper escaped his throat. His tail, for the first time in 2 years, gave a single weak thump against the ground. It was a language spoken without words, a language understood only by those who have faced death together. The pack was renewed. The mission was clear. His training took over. He lunged at the zip ties binding David's wrists, his powerful jaws clamping down. But the industrial plastic wouldn't give. It cut into his gums, and the taste of his own blood filled his mouth, but it held firm. He switched tactics, digging frantically at the base of the iron post, claws scraping against the hard-packed earth. But the posts were set too deep. It was hopeless. As the sun climbed higher, turning the swamp into a sweltering steam bath, Kaiser's tactical mind processed the situation. He couldn't free them, not like this, but he could sustain them. He remembered a small, cool water creek hidden deep in a thicket of cypress trees, more than a mile away. It was a desperate gamble for an aging dog already on the edge of exhaustion. But it was the only move left. He turned and vanished into the trees. The journey was a special kind of hell. The sharp cypress roots tore at his paws. The oppressive heat felt like a physical weight, pressing down on him. His aging body screamed in protest. Near the creek, he found his tool, a shard of a broken plastic water bottle. He filled it, the cool water a brief blessing, before picking it up carefully in his mouth and beginning the brutal journey back. He stumbled, spilling precious mouthfuls. He had to stop, his lungs burning, his heart pounding against his ribs. But the image of his soldier, dying under the sun, pushed him forward. He was no longer just a dog. He was a lifeline. When he finally returned to the clearing, he didn't hesitate. He gently nudged the piece of plastic to David's cracked lips, letting the life-giving water trickle out. He then moved to Leo, and then to Marcus. He was a soldier, and a soldier knows you take care of the entire unit. One trip, then another, and another. Each journey was a piece of his own life force, traded for a few more minutes of theirs. Loyalty. True loyalty isn't a memory you recall. It's a debt etched onto the soul. It doesn't fade with time or distance. It simply waits for the moment to be repaid. In the heart of that aging, forgotten soldier, the mission was never, ever over. But loyalty alone cannot conquer the sun. Each trip weakened him. Each drop of water only delayed the inevitable. Kaiser knew a new plan was needed, a final, desperate run for help. Miles from the sweltering clearing of slow death, there was a place of quiet healing. A sanctuary tucked away in the Florida wilderness, a final refuge for the lost, the broken, and the ones society had deemed too difficult. It was run by Elena Vance, a former Army Ranger who had traded the rigid lines of command for the messy, unpredictable work of mending shattered spirits, both animal and human. She came here to escape the echoes of her past, but on this day, the past came looking for her. She saw him at the edge of her property line, a Belgian Malinois stumbling through the brush. It wasn't the gait of a lost pet. It was the determined, agonizing march of a soldier on his last leg. As he collapsed near her gate, she rushed over. She saw the bleeding paws, the severe dehydration, the signs of extreme thermal stress. But then she looked into his eyes. They weren't asking for shelter. They were delivering a report. Kaiser, summoning the very last of his energy reserves, lifted his head, grabbed the cuff of her jeans in his mouth, and tugged. A weak, desperate pull toward the swamp. When she hesitated, he let out a single sharp bark. It wasn't a plea, it was an order. Her rational mind screamed danger. A lone woman following a strange, wounded dog into the remote swamps at dusk. It was a textbook way to disappear. Every civilian instinct told her to call for help, to wait, but the soldier in her, the part of her that understood duty, the part that lived by the creed of never leaving a fallen comrade behind, gave a different order. Follow the dog. She packed a med kit, water, and a tactical knife, her movements swift and sure. She followed Kaiser back into the growing darkness, the dog moving with a purposeful intelligence that defied his condition. He wasn't just wandering, he was leading her down the most efficient path, a silent, four-legged commander on a critical mission. 3 hours later, she found them. The scene was worse than anything her mind had prepared her for. 3 men hanging from their bonds like broken marionettes, their skin flushed a dangerous red, their breathing shallow. This wasn't random violence. This was a methodical, patient execution. Her training took over. She was no longer just a sanctuary owner. She was a combat medic. She cut the first man free, David, and pressed a canteen to his lips. His eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. He didn't thank her. He looked past her, at the collapsed form of the dog, and with a voice like sandpaper, he whispered, "Kaiser." He did it. Then he managed one more name, a name that stopped Elena's heart cold. Croft. Julian Croft did this. That name. It wasn't just a name. It was a ghost stepping out of the shadows of her past. Years ago, Captain Elena Vance had been the lead investigator into the death of a young soldier in the Sahel, a soldier named Daniel Croft. Her official report had concluded the death was a tragic accident caused by equipment failure. His father, Julian, had never accepted it. He had accused her and the entire unit of a cover-up. And now here she was, in a forgotten corner of the world, staring at the horrific, real-world consequence of that man's unyielding grief. This wasn't a new tragedy. It was the final bloody chapter of an old one. The past is never truly dead. It's not even past. It's an echo, waiting for the right moment to call out our name, forcing us to confront the ghosts we thought we had buried. She answered that call, not just for 3 strangers in a swamp, but for the memory of a young soldier she could never bring home. But a rescue is only the beginning. The hardest battle was about to be fought, not against the swamp's unforgiving heat, but under the harsh, sterile lights of a hospital. He had saved 3 men from the jaws of death. But as Kaiser lay on a cold, steel examination table, his breathing shallow, the question hanging in the sterile air was, who was there to save him? The veterinarians worked tirelessly, but the diagnosis was grim. His kidneys were shutting down. His body, having waged an impossible war against the sun and the swamp, was now losing the battle for its own survival. He had given everything to his mission, and the price was his own life, ebbing away with every labored breath. As Elena and David's family kept a silent, heartbroken vigil, a man arrived at the clinic. He was in his late 60s, with graying temples and the unmistakable, ramrod-straight posture of a career soldier. He walked with a quiet authority that made everyone turn. He wasn't there to ask about the rescued men. He was there for the dog. "My name is Colonel Matthews," he said, his voice low and steady, though his eyes were filled with a deep, weary sadness. "I was his commanding officer in the Sahel." He reached into his wallet and produced a faded photograph. In it, a younger Matthews stood proudly beside a magnificent, alert Belgian Malinois in full tactical gear. It was Kaiser in his prime. His K9 serial number 8X44. And then Colonel Matthews told them the rest of the story. The story that was worse than the abandonment. The story of the failure. "He was supposed to come home with me," Matthews began, his voice thick with a guilt that had aged for 2 years. "The retirement papers were signed. He was going to live out his days on my ranch in Colorado. But there was a mistake, a clerical error. A piece of paper was filed in the wrong place, and his transport order was switched. Kaiser was sent to a different holding facility, one that wasn't prepared for a dog with his background. His hypervigilance, his reactivity to loud noises, his pacing, all classic signs of combat-induced PTSD, were misinterpreted. They weren't seen as the scars of a hero. They were labeled as behavioral issues." Matthew's jaw tightened. "By the time I tracked him down, it was too late. They had already sent me a copy of his final file." He paused, and the next words came out like broken glass. "It was stamped in red ink. Euthanized, unfit for adoption." The room fell into a stunned silence. Officially, Kaiser hadn't just been lost. He had been erased, declared dead by the very system he had so bravely served. A low-level kennel worker, unable to go through with the needle, had instead driven him deep into the Everglades, a misguided act of mercy that was, in itself, a death sentence. David's young son, Noah, had been listening quietly from the doorway, trying to understand the heavy adult words. He stepped forward, his small face filled with a devastatingly simple clarity. He looked at the colonel, then at his father, and then at the still form of the dog on the table. "He saved my dad," Noah said, his voice clear and pure. "Why did they want to throw him away?" The question, asked with the perfect innocence of a child, shattered everyone. It cut through the excuses of bureaucracy and the complexities of the system and laid bare the raw, unforgivable injustice of it all. This was more than just a tragic mistake. It was the story of a promise, broken by the cold indifference of a machine built to fight wars, but not built to care for the silent, loyal soldiers left behind in their wake. A hero's worth is not determined by a rubber stamp on a piece of paper. It is measured by the lives they touch and the love they inspire. And as the truth of Kaiser's forgotten past finally came to light, another, much darker truth was about to be dragged out of the shadows. A fortress of wealth and power can hide many secrets. But when a foundation is built on a lie, it only takes one small crack for the entire structure to come crashing down. For Julian Croft, that crack wasn't caused by a detective or a prosecutor. It was caused by the haunting image of a loyal dog. One of Croft's own men, unable to shake the memory of Kaiser's heroic efforts in the swamp, walked into a police station and confessed everything. The story exploded. The carefully constructed world of Julian Croft, the untouchable titan of industry, began to crumble. News vans parked outside his gates. His board of directors panicked. The predator had become the prey. In a desperate attempt to control the narrative, he made a phone call. He called the one person he believed was at the center of it all, Ellen Vance. His voice was a cold, smooth veneer over a core of pure panic. He offered money, a fortune for her silence. He blamed his men, calling them rogue employees who had gone too far. But Elena didn't engage. She didn't argue. She just waited for him to finish, and then she delivered the truth that would serve as the final, fatal blow to his twisted crusade. "The dog you left to die in that swamp, Julian," she said, her voice calm and clear as a bell. "The one you dismissed as just an animal? It was Daniel's K9 partner from the Sahel, the hero he wrote about in all his letters home. That dog, Kaiser, is the one who saved them." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the sound of a man's entire reality shattering, the symbol of his son's honor, the creature his son had loved and trusted, had single-handedly dismantled his monument to revenge. The irony was a punishment more profound than any prison sentence. His son, through the unwavering loyalty of his dog, had sent a message from beyond the grave. "You are wrong." Months later, Julian Croft stood before a judge, a broken, hollowed-out version of the powerful man he once was. The courtroom was packed. The media was there. This was the moment for the victims, David, Leo, and Marcus, to finally have their say, to demand their pound of flesh, to call for the harshest justice possible. And then David was called to the stand. Everyone leaned forward, expecting a speech filled with rage and pain, but David's voice was quiet, steady, and heavy with a wisdom forged in suffering. He looked directly at the man who had tried to murder him. He spoke about the nature of pain, how it can be a poison that spreads from one person to the next if you let it. He said that while he could never forgive the act, he could, as a father who loved his own child beyond measure, understand the grief that had planted the seed of this madness. Then he turned to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear, "this man has taken enough from me. I will not let him take my peace of mind too. I will not let my son see me consumed by the same hatred that drove him. For the sake of my own healing, and for my family, I ask you to show him a measure of leniency." The courtroom was stunned into silence. It wasn't an act of weakness. It was an act of profound strength. It was David choosing to end the cycle. He wasn't freeing Croft from consequence. He was freeing himself from the prison of vengeance. In the end, true strength isn't found in the power to inflict pain. It's found in the courage to absorb it and choose to heal it, not just for yourself, but so it doesn't poison the next generation. They chose to build a future, rather than remain prisoners of someone else's past. And that future, built on a foundation of forgiveness and improbable loyalty, began as all good things do, with a simple act of kindness on a quiet, sunlit morning. 6 months later, the Florida sun felt different. It was no longer an enemy, a suffocating force of heat, but a warm embrace. On the sprawling green lawn of Elena Vance's animal sanctuary, a new kind of pack had formed. Kaiser, the old soldier, limped slightly as he walked, a permanent physical reminder of his sacrifice. His kidneys would never fully heal, but his spirit had. He lay in the shade, his head resting in the lap of David's son, Noah, who was quietly reading a book to him. The chasm of silence between father and son was gone, replaced by the easy comfort of a shared love for the dog who had brought them back together. Across the yard, Leo was on the phone with his parents, a wide, relaxed smile on his face as he talked about their upcoming visit. Marcus sat on the porch steps, sketching in a notebook, the design for the front door of his new workshop. And watching over them all were Elena and Colonel Matthews, two former soldiers who had found an unexpected peace in a new, unconventional unit to command. They were a mosaic of healed souls, pieced together by the loyalty of one incredible animal. This is the story's timeless lesson. Loyalty has no expiration date. Courage comes in all forms, sometimes on 4 legs. And while systems, paperwork, and even people can fail us, the unbreakable bond between two souls, whether man or animal, can move mountains, cross continents, and conquer even the darkest swamps of hatred. Kaiser's story speaks to a place deep inside all of us. It reminds us of that quiet, loyal companion waiting for us at the door, the one who doesn't care about our bad days, our failures, or the scars we carry, the one who simply offers love, pure and unconditional, asking for nothing in return. They are the silent heroes in our own homes. This story needs to be heard, not just to honor one dog named Kaiser, but to be a voice for the thousands of other K9 veterans who are still out there, waiting for their own promise to be kept. Please help me spread this message. If Kaiser's story of unwavering loyalty touched your heart, Letting us know with a like helps tell YouTube that these stories matter and need to be seen by more people. And if you believe in the power of stories like this to inspire and create change, consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss the next journey we take together. But most importantly, I want to end where we began, with the heroes in our own lives. Please share the name of an animal who has changed your world for the better in the comments below. I read everyone, and I would be truly honored to hear their story.